Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion on the future of commercial property valuation. My name's Aaliyah Pollock, and I work at RICS, also known as the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. And for those of you who aren't aware, RICS sets global standards for the built environment, with our members working across everything from land, planning and development, construction, and asset management. This broad focus gives us a unique perspective on how the valuation process is really evolving with the integration of technologies, especially in this new wave of digital transformation. And in my role at RICS, I specifically look at how AI data and technology is reshaping the way that we approach the built and natural environments. And a big part of this work involves running the RICS Tech Partner Program, which is a collaborative community of tech innovators. And we work together to produce thought leadership content to help bridge this gap between the surveying profession and those leading in this space. Today, we'll be discussing how technology is shaping the processes involved with commercial property valuation, which is improving accuracy, efficiency, and our overall approach to valuation, whilst also addressing the challenges that we still face. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my panelists. So, Alex, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I'm Alex. I'm one of the founders of Valos, which started back in 2020 with the aim of automating the production of valuation reports so that essentially technology works in harmony with the valuers itself. And essentially the idea came about during my time in industry as a valuer, working far more on the administrative side of things, that is to mean data gathering, report writing and formatting, than I thought I was actually going to do, and not spending as much time as I would have liked or have hoped to spend on actually analyzing data and determining value. And when I couldn't really see any solutions in the market to assist in my valuation processes, I decided to leave and set up Valos myself.
Thanks, Alex. Max?
Hi, Max, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm one of the founders of Einwert, and we built a platform for the B2B market for bringing together institutional investors, among others, together with appraisers and valuers. We started even with our own team of appraisers and helped them with software, with digital tools to really streamline the process, first of all, and let them focus on the key task of being an appraiser and streamline as much as possible of these manual busy work. And by also digitalizing, streamlining this process on their side, we are also able to deliver our customers, like the real estate funds, the banks, the insights, the data that is usually buried in PDFs or even in printed form, and make it accessible and actionable for them, and also to guide the process, the collaborational aspect with them. And that's what we really try to build, a platform that helps both sides in this valuation process.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Feroz.
Thanks, Aaliyah. I'm Feroz Noordin. I'm one of the co-founders of Built AI. What we do, we help commercial property investors and brokers analyze new properties to potentially acquire, and or to analyze their existing portfolio to forecast, run scenarios analysis over. We were set up about 4 years ago, and our basic premise is that it currently takes way too long and it's way too complicated and challenging to analyze the building, create a full financial analysis, or even run a basic valuation. And with our platform, that takes about 30 minutes, which the majority of that time is for the valuer or investment team to consider kind of the business plan strategy. We provide visualizations, deep analysis, lots of scenario analysis. And effectively, our goal is to make the industry move a lot faster, but also with a lot more accuracy, enabling a lot more of our clients to be focusing on the real estate, the strategy, and the really interesting part, and less on the number crunching, the analysis, the things you have to do, but perhaps it's kind of the output rather than kind of the strategy elements.
Thanks, Feroz, and to our panelists there for your introductions. So moving on, technology is really starting to shape the processes involved with commercial property valuations. We've seen the rise of AI, big data, and tools like geospatial technologies that help us make valuations faster and more accurate. However, we're still in the process of fully integrating these tools across the industry, especially considering how complex commercial properties can be. So with all that in mind, how would we all describe the current state of technology adoption in commercial property valuation?
I would say there's a lot of technology used in valuation, but it's kind of it's surrounded in a whole range of manual process, and they don't really work together. So, and by technology, it could be as simple as like Excel or a mobile phone and conversation and various things. But like the actual kind of process of running and collecting data, the process of distilling that into a report, the process of analyzing that, all of that I think is still heavily in people's minds and so subjectively done. And what that means is that every firm does it differently. So the same process that's kind of very similar across the industry is done very uniquely in every firm, which then stops adoption because most software can't run 100 different ways. So there's a degree of there's technology being used, but it's still heavily manual when you look at the actual activity and time it takes to run a process.
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe also on that side, if I may continue there. So as I see it, there are a lot of these, let's say, isolated solutions that can produce a digital output, but often there are no standardized interfaces how this data and this information can flow. And there, a lot of different companies, customers build like their own solution that works for a certain part for their side. And still because there is no standardized interface and how data can be exchanged, there's always like these manual steps involved or exchanging Excel files per customer that contain a certain data just so they are able to, for example, put that into their SAP system. And I think that's a challenge and the next steps forward to harmonize that and make it easier for information to flow.
Yeah, Alex, did you want to add some comments?
I think the guys covered it quite well. I would say one thing in that, at least in the valuation space specifically, I can't think of anything. Well, I guess apart from the three companies on this call now, I can't think of any kind of transformational technology that has been incorporated into the sector in any large way. And I think if you look at the main platforms that are used from at least a Val's perspective, they've been around for like 10, 15, 20 years. You're talking about valuation calculation tools like Argus or Kel, and you're talking about gathering comparable evidence like CoStar or EG Radius. But they're not new tools. They're just tools that have been here since. They were some of the first tools to come to the industry. And yes, there's been kind of R&D internally, and those tools have come on. But there hasn't been anything else that has kind of transformed the way in which the industry operates wholesale at that scale since those tools were introduced.
Yeah, interesting. When we actually look at the role of a property valuer, especially someone that specializes with commercial properties, we know that technology, especially technologies like AI, are there to really automate the mundane tasks. So what would we say are the most time-consuming tasks that are affecting our valuers? What tasks are these tools there to automate?
I think it depends on the nature of the work, and also what the specific prop tech company is looking to achieve in the space. So you will have companies where ultimately their aim is to automate the entirety of the process all the way through to creating an AVM for commercial valuations. And you'll have some other companies that think that technology should be an enabling tool for valuers to empower them. That's certainly the stance that we take. We primarily believe that the role of technology is in assisting the valuer to remove the mundane activities, the stuff that you probably don't need to go to university to do, the stuff that probably doesn't need a lot of thinking to do, and it's more robotic in nature. It doesn't really require any critical thinking. So stuff like going on a multitude of different websites to gather information relating to the subject property, all the standard stuff like EPCs, planning applications, conservation areas, whether or not the property is listed, writing a bit about the location and description of the property type thing, those sorts of activities, as well as incorporating those into bespoke reports, formatting of the reports themselves. You don't want people messing around with Word documents and figuring out why their section headings are going from section 1 and skipping all the way to section 4, and then spending an untold amount of time trying to fix those aspects of things. And even now, some new lender requirements, which are to kind of rag rate the EPCs, which essentially, for want of a better term, is basically just doing some color coding, some coloring based on some parameters, i.e. if the EPC is rated A or B, color the cell in green. And you don't really want highly skilled, highly trained, fairly well-paid professionals to start doing a paint by numbers exercise. So it's really those sorts of aspects that I see the role in kind of technology taking.
Yeah, maybe also one thing that we observe also, as I mentioned, like we often also look from the point of view who receives the appraisal and the report at the end, and what are they also doing with it. And a lot of steps are connected to like plausibility checks and going through it and check formalities. And there are, as you mentioned, like not like there are trivial things that need to be checked. Is it the right asset? Is it the right address? Is it the appraiser that was mandated? And I also think that like quality control can be taken, obviously to a certain degree, by technology, and really make sure that the quality can be improved by that.
Maybe building on that, we see that quite a lot where there's the same activity being done by multiple parties in the building. So whether it's the lender, the valuer, the owner, if it's a buyer seller, the same information is being sent across people by manual files. The same analysis is being run multiple times. The same sort of scenarios are being run across the thing. And it might take a small amount of time in each player, but each player is doing it each time, and then wondering why they get different answers because they're doing it differently. And you can have this waste of effort because actually you're not talking, you're not seeing it as one building and one set of information. You're seeing it as like these separate files, and it's just because of the connectivity. So as an analogy, when you make a payment from one bank to another bank, you're not like sending two different files. It's like one transfer. So the same thing happens on both sides. So like that connectivity, we think between sort of an example is why does a valuer require you to get a file from a client to run information on? Like if there's a way to connect them together, then there's a simpler way for the valuer to do their role without having to ask a manual effort on both sides.
So that's actually really interesting, because you're right. There is a lot of tasks that are done throughout, let's say, a lending process, right, where everyone is repeating the same task. That is the borrower, the lender, the valuer, panel managers, if they're involved in the process as well. They're all doing fairly similar tasks, which on the one hand is kind of a waste of time. And what you really want is for when a source of information is derived at any point in time, a new source of information, you want that to kind of flow through so that everyone is working off of the same information. However, the one issue with that then comes down to the question of liability. And the reason why everyone's doing their own searches and their own investigations is so that they can use that to rely on it. And I think there needs to be probably a much larger shift in thinking to be able to have information flow from one place all the way through without everyone repeating that same data gathering process, because that issue of liability, especially when it comes to the valuers, is going to be a massive concern.
Cool. We've all talked about some very interesting points there. One other question I really wanted to drill down on is there is this misconception of around property valuation. We've got commercial and residential, and they're very different they're very different things. The way we conduct residential valuations is very different to how we do so for commercial. So the first question I wanted to ask is, what really are these key differences between the residential and commercial property valuation, and how do the types of technologies that we use vary for these activities?
Just very quickly, before we dive into the differences between commercial and resi data and valuations, I think it's also probably worth kind of giving it a high level in terms of what property data is as a whole. What we've seen a lot of the time is actually property data is messy, it's subjective, and it is contextual. And what that actually means is, like, it then becomes harder to analyze and devise an output for the end user, because you might have, let's say, planning applications, right? You've got planning applications. So for a valuer, they want to know what planning applications might affect the value of the asset. An investor might want to know kind of what are the local major developments in the vicinity. And a builder might want to see, right, what applications have been recently granted where they might be able to do some BD for, right? So theoretically, they are all the same data sets, i.e. they're all looking at planning data, but they're all wanting to query that data in a different way. And so essentially what you'd need to have is essentially 3 different technical perspectives to deliver 3 different outputs, but it's all using the same data set. So I think property data as a whole is quite a difficult thing to contend with because of those different aspects.
Yeah, maybe. Sorry, you go first.
No, I think it's fair. I think commercial property in particular has a bigger challenge as well, because even if you look at the address, there's so many different units, there's different locations, there's different, like, if I go well beyond one postcode, there's so many things to even deal with just from a location data perspective. When you try to map information to a commercial property, the risk of error, the risk of subjectivity, you can call it, is much higher. But then, from a residential perspective, I think when you compare the two, like in a very simple way, and a 2-bedroom flat is the most comparable to another 2-bedroom flat. So there's a degree of 2 things. One, there's a lot of 2-bedroom flats around. There's a lot more higher volume of them compared to like 5-story office buildings with X and Y spec. So it's much easier. There's much more information, even if it's hard to deal with. There's much more information in residential than commercial. And in commercial, 2 buildings in one street across the street from each other often just aren't comparable. And as much as location is the same, there's so many other things that come into play. There's a lot more factors, which makes it much more challenging to kind of deal with commercial data and kind of use it that. So I think there's a lot of real estate strategy and subjectivity and opinion and experience that comes into in commercial that just is, I don't think will be automated away. And secondly, I think is the most interesting part of kind of evaluation and kind of analysis in my perspective.
Yeah, and I think it also goes down in a lot of different rabbit holes, how much information you need. Like if we look at the rental contracts that you can have for commercial, there are so many more options, variants that you can have. Also, let's say if you have a large single tenant office building, then that company that is renting the place, like that, you really need to dig down what are the risks associated with that tenant, and how if you also like third-party use after the tenant might leave, and all that complexity is not really present in Resi as well. So this there.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think essentially what it comes down to is when you're working with anything that's commercial property data, it just exacerbates the issues that you see with property data in general. So you've got issues with data across the board, but it is just far worse with commercial data for the reasons that that Firoz and Max just explained. And also it is down to the homogeneous nature of residential property versus commercial property, right? The availability of evidence, transactional evidence and information, but also like when it comes to, let's say commercial data, right? You could, as was said, you could be a listed building next to the Shard, but also when you're looking at any office building, let's say, or any commercial building, it's then not also just about the entirety of the building, because you might have some floors that are let to different tenants and whatever it might be. So then when you're analyzing it, you then not only need to determine what building it is, but does it refer to a specific floor or to a specific area of the building? Whereas when you're referring to a residential building, you tend to pretty much always typically refer to this entire site and building upon that site. And I think you can see the issues with trying to determine and then map data to assets when you look at trying to use UPRNs. So UPRNs are really useful for very easy residential buildings, and it's very easy to map. But when you get anything more complex in the bog standard site with a building on it that's single let, just one property, UPRNs just kind of fall apart, at least in our experience.
The other challenge is, like, if you look at things like industrial, which is like out of town, it's not surrounded by other things. What's the most comparable unit to industrial unit in in the Midlands? Might be something away even out of the Midlands, and sort of it's very difficult to kind of do that purely on a data perspective. The data is as messy as the guys have been talking about.
Yeah, regarding standardization, I think especially in the commercial space, dealing with bigger investors that have a certain way of handling things, and they obviously don't want to adapt to all things immediately. I think there the challenge is how can we really bring forward certain standards. So I know, like, we are located in Germany, in Munich, and there is a German-like standard for certain fund appraisals, but by far this is not an international standard, and it's very tailored to a certain need, and also it's just for a certain type of appraisal. And this really makes it hard for, like, what can be a large-scale standard. And you guys were talking in the residential context about 2-room bedrooms. In Germany, we don't really talk about these 2 rooms, but we more talk in the sense of square meters. And so already this makes it, introduces some challenges. And especially if data, there are a lot of manual steps involved in exchanging data, because that often means I need to fill something out by hand. And the more data I can enter, the more tedious this process is. And as long as these manual steps are required, standardization will always be harder to really be involved there.
I think standardization is also probably impossible if you're talking about standardization of property data across different geographies. So you could get there in a country and standardize data and protocols there, but then trying to extrapolate that into other countries where they operate differently, they work on different metrics, they work on different bases. Some countries are working on square foot, square meterage. Okay, that's fine, because you can do that translation. But then there's like other data aspects that are just not relevant, not recorded. There's the availability of data in different countries, and then trying to kind of map stuff on a like-for-like basis is also difficult. And then what you have to do is you have to have enough resources and capital as a prop tech solution to be able to adapt your offering to those different markets and geographies. And there's only a very few small amount of companies that have the capacity to do that, and even them, from what I have heard, just can't do it and can't react to those different geographical changes quickly enough, or even at all. So I think it's a long-standing issue that we're probably not going to be able to solve, about certainly cross-border data standardization.
What about in the UK specifically? How is data standardization here, and what can the industry do to address these challenges?
I think a good analogy for this is for companies, because if you think of like company's house and sort of company level information and financials, they're pretty standardized. You can compare like for like. there's different levels required for small and big companies, but like the reporting standards that have been built, but they've been built over decades. And I think so from a property perspective, like a lot of the similar, there's a lot of similarities in structure around information between a company and a building, but the history of that isn't standard. So I think it's kind of a starting point. Echoing kind of what Alex said as well, it's a prop tech company can very easily aim to solve that problem, but it's very hard to solve it in isolation because the information, there's even a question of who owns the data. Is it owned by the company, by the person who owns the building, or by the person who valued it, or by public good? Like it's kind of, there's a confidentiality. There's a whole bunch of things which in the end I think starts off with some degree of like top down or like industry led sort of desire. And we hear about standardization a lot, but I think it helps a lot of people, but does it help anyone enough for there to be a collective like will to do so? Is kind of probably my open question on this one.
I think also like you need a huge shift in how and where data is currently stored and gathered from, i.e. it works quite nicely when it's all centralized by the government, let's say EPCs, for example. But even when it is centralized by government, you have oftentimes information on the EPC website relating to a particular property. The address differs for the same property on the VOA website, and they're both held at a government level. So even at that level, there's no standardization. And then you take stuff at a council level, then it's how do you get 365 plus different councils all on the same systems, which they're currently not? How do you get them to all input information in the same way so that they can be extrapolated in a standardized format? Also, how do you get some councils to just even adopt some form of what's it called? Just technology. Like you got a lot of councils that are still publishing most of their information on PDFs. So then you've got some councils that have adopted technology and some that haven't. So it's such a pervasive issue across the country. Again, it's a difficult one to solve.
And what role do we think that technology platforms could play in improving data sharing?
Well, I think as Fira said, right, a technology company can solve it, but to what avail? As in, like, is there a demand? Is there a requirement to solve the issue? Is anyone going to pay for someone to develop that solution? Because it's not just a solution. It's a solution that requires everyone to adopt the same process and mechanism. And if they don't, then all you've done is introduce another way to not standardize data. And now you've got, instead of 365 councils, you've got that plus one other random operator in the space that's also trying to standardize stuff. So it just, unless everyone's on board, doesn't really change anything.
I think that's the thing. Because asked me the point about what's the return for the technology company to do so, the reason to do so, and it comes back to the first question you asked, Leah, which is like the adoption of technology in the market. Because I think when the market starts to take technology a lot more, there's like a circular element to this. It takes it more seriously. The return for most data standardization becomes much higher. And so there'll be a lot more focus in solving that, which will then lead to more adoption. So there's a degree of like finding the lever that makes this really valuable. Again, in the company space, like when you have a stock market and investment, there's so much more speed around things. It kind of needs data to be accurate at all times. Right now, is the problem big enough for the market to really go after? I think it needs to start from like the owners, the valuers, the advisors, kind of the industry itself, and if there's enough value there, technology companies will go after it, no doubt.
Yeah, and maybe one aspect I also find now interesting, especially with certain newer technologies, especially regarding AI coming up, is previously we were really depending on, we need to have a certain data format so that we can send it through an API and we can use it on the other side. But now with recent developments, this is not as strict as it was before, because now even if you just hand over a PDF, I can much easier as previously before extract data out of it and also tell the AI agent what format I need that data in, which reduces a little the pressure on having like everyone uses the same format. Obviously, with all the side effects that this might have, but this gives a way that we can work more effective with unstructured data.
Yeah, thanks. I think this ties us quite nicely onto our next topic, which is about the path to digitalization. So we've talked about AI, and it is definitely somewhat of a buzzword right now. We've got a lot of companies that seem to be adopting it without having proper foundations in place. It's easy to fall in the trap of adopting tech for tech's sake rather than thoughtfully integrating it into existing workflows. So what would we say are the proper steps to digitalization in the valuation industry and real estate industry, really? How do we ensure that companies have the right foundations before jumping to advanced technologies like AI?
Yeah, maybe one thought from my side. So I think it's always nice to take a step back and see there needs to be a pain point, an issue that we want to address. And technology, digital processes, AI are tools to tackle those issues. And I think the first step in implementing like an AI strategy or a digitalization strategy is really to be aware what are my processes and where can I use which tool to my most benefit, and then really see what solutions I can use to tackle that. I think there are probably a lot of great solutions out there, but they need to work together, and it needs to be like a good flow. But I think the first step is to really be aware of my own process and then go from there.
I think my view is that a lot of firms have had great intentions and have tried things, and it hasn't worked for them. And so they feel really nervous about trying things again because they're like, well, I got burnt before. Why would next time be different? But it's because of the point that Max made, which is they're trying it because they know they should try and be different, but they haven't thought about why. And they haven't thought about like, what's the payoff for them? Because eventually you don't want technology to be another cost in your business that doesn't lead to anything. So you gotta think about what do you want to change? How do you make more money in the business? How do you take so much cost out that's viable? What's the kind of goal around it? Then say, okay, what do I think really helps make that happen? And what we see with our clients is that the clients who get the most value out of it are the ones who really have an idea of what they want to do. And if they want to look at more, if they want to grow their business by doing this, if they want to enter a new area, if they have a challenge doing this worse, and those clients we can help really, really quickly. And the ones where it's more challenging for them is when they know they have to change, but they don't know exactly what. And so we work with them to figure out how best to kind of articulate some of that. But the quicker you figure out where your pain points are, as Max said, the quicker you can change that. And then there are lots of great tools to help you do so, but you got to start with inward-looking view.
Just to kind of echo that, I think the issues that the property industry faces is the same issues that prop tech companies and any new company coming to the market faces, and that you cannot work back from the solution. And in this context, the solution is AI. You have to work up from the problem. And especially in the property industry and with property consultancies, a lot of the problems don't need AI as a solution. They just need a basic infrastructure, basic processes, just general implementation that other industries have adopted 5, 10, 15 years ago that companies now in the property industry still don't adopt. And they just want to make a sudden leap from zero to incorporating AI at the heart of every new technology decision, but without the foundations to support that. And it's dangerous because as soon as you start working back from a solution, you're trying to make stuff fit where it shouldn't, and you're trying to kind of make everything go into one solution where it doesn't necessarily fit. And there might be far easier ways to address that initial problem. And once you have addressed it, then you can work up from there and further expand on it.
But the positive part of that is it can be really fast still. It doesn't have to take years or months or something. Once you kind of start somewhere and you kind of solve this, it'll become really apparent what's next and what's next and what's next.
Yeah.
So it just needs to kind of have a thoughtful start, and it can happen really fast. Some of our clients have gone over, less than 12 months from being very sort of paper and Excel based to being the entire process being heavily driven by technology, where even the investment committees run on screen with no paper, no conversation, etc. It can happen really, really quickly. Just have to sort of start with that sort of problem in mind and the goal in mind.
Yeah.
As you would do in almost any other sort of problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, I tell you what's actually also important is the way that companies look at adopting technology and how that's kind of run internally. And what you tend to find, and this isn't just a property thing, this is just a general business thing, is that it doesn't necessarily, most companies don't necessarily foster innovation, because if you're the one spearheading a potential solution for a company and it doesn't go right, essentially you've put your head over the parapet. You are the one now on the hook for that entire project going wrong. And what that does is it doesn't encourage people to take calculated risks and try new things. It encourages people to kind of keep the status quo, don't rock the boat too much type thing. Whereas if it worked in the inverse, you'd have a lot more adoption and development in the space.
Yeah, maybe taking an analogy, in like before I was in property, I was in banking, and in banking it took about 5-6 years to make considerable change because you had to fail, make some mistakes to figure out what you had to do. So like I think trying something, as Alex said, and then not working is just a path to making it work, making something work. And that's just in almost every other instance we kind of realize that and accept that. I think in technology it's a bit new and it's a bit different, and you're kind of changing what's kind of already happening for a long time. It's a mindset change to just sort of just try and move, because if the business problem is big enough, it'll pay off.
Yeah. And that's the thing, you want to make sure that if you are trying something new, that it either succeeds or fails quickly. And if it fails quickly, just ditch it and try something else, because what you then tend to get, because of the whole issue of someone's on the hook for this decision, you then get that same person or the team around them just still trying to make the solution fit when everyone knows it's doomed for failure anyway. So then you've dragged on the inevitable failure for another 2-3 years before everyone's come to the same conclusion that you could have come to 2-3 years previous, and also saved a little bit more time and money in the process.
And I also think that maybe coming back to what now AI is doing and all of that, I think with the recent developments, also like let's say on the decision maker level, more imagination was sparked, like, hey, we can really improve processes by AI, not necessarily because that's the final implementation of a digital process, but again, like getting the ball rolling again, like, hey, we can really improve our internal processes by AI or by any other mean, but that this is now back like on their minds and really is something they see benefits from in other industries and really want to get the same effect.
Yeah, that's the thing. AI is a huge era-changing technology in that scenario, bigger than the iPhone and mobile did like 15 years ago. Because the things that were not solvable 5 years ago are solvable now. The ability to communicate and act on things through just speech and messages, it's incredible. And so there is a lot more that's solvable. I think it can look very difficult to tell things apart, but as long as you're kind of focusing on kind of what your business problem is to kind of go after, and kind of how you best embed that within the company, this incredible opportunity, and the technology is moving really, really fast. So there's a really good moment now to kind of jump on kind of the digitalization sort of transformation sort of approach to each business.
Yeah, thanks. So as technology continues to reshape the valuation industry, the role of valuers are also evolving. We're seeing more automation and data-driven tools, but at the same time, there's a need for human expertise and in interpreting complex property details and other activities. So with all of these changes, how do we all see the role of a commercial property valuer and other professionals involved in this process? How do we see it evolving over the next 5 years, say?
I think it's hard to predict where AI and technology is going to be in the next 5 years. I think we would have struggled to do so beginning of last year to predict where we were end of last year, and probably will be the same come the end of this year. But what you can do is you can predict the themes that are likely to occur, and that is advancements in technology, AI becoming cheaper to use, AI permeating far more of the processes than it currently does. You can also assume that firms not embracing and adopting technology are likely not going to be able to last unless that attitude shifts significantly. And what you can also assume from the valuer's perspective is that AI will lead to a higher quality and quantity of output, where you are now able to remove the monotony and administrative aspects of valuation reporting. You are enabling the valuers to spend far more time analyzing the data, determining value, coming to that conclusion, and really providing value add into the process, which is only a benefit to the industry. And so I think that's how it will get there. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I'm pretty confident that that's essentially going to be the key outcomes of this over time. But I can't see the role of especially a commercial valuer going anywhere anytime soon, simply for the myriad of reasons we kind of touched upon at the beginning of this session in terms of data transparency, accuracy, and so on. And so instead of focusing on those admin type tasks, it will be much more in terms of thinking, analyzing, understanding, and maybe also a bit more on the kind of spreading out to the more BD side of things, where people just don't get to do much of now because they're so bogged down with everything else.
Yeah, I totally agree with Alex. I think the role will shift. It won't go away. It's to be able to focus on the core competencies of a valuer. I think that will be more highlighted, and I think also the requirement when it comes to what data, what depth an appraisal needs to have will increase, and the people who are not following the let's say the digital trend there will have a hard time to keep up, because clients will require more and more insights and want to have things faster and want to have like really in-depth appraisals. And it's not enough to just say, okay, the location is described by these 5 numbers and here you go. But really the insights is that's the most important part that they want to have.
Yeah, I think I'll reiterate, property is a very person-to-person industry. I think that's the same globally. I think that'll stay the same because if you look through the decades of other industries and how they've transformed, the nature and like foundation of each of the industries have stayed the same, and technology's enabled it to get more and more that way. So I think real estate will stay a very person-to-person industry, and kind of all of our jobs and all of our focuses are on how you amplify the abilities and the speed in which some of this can happen. What we hear in the market is things like a lot of owners and lenders want more frequent valuations. So they want more real-time information, and it's kind of constrained by the current process of how something happens, because you physically can't do it at the moment. So with AI and technology coming through, what you're able to do is probably quite different and unlocks things that 5 years ago was impossible. So I think So when you can probably sell a very different sort of service to some extent in a few years' time, but it'll still be very much like value at the heart of it, and also the communication between valuer and client becomes even more important because there's so much other information and technology data playing into you. So how you communicate that and make sure you're aligned, you're kind of adding value, building credibility, all that sort of elements will be at the heart of that.
Yeah, so we've spoken there about how technologies like AI will automate those mundane tasks, freeing up the valuer for the really important analytics. So taking this into consideration, what skills would you say would be the most important for valuers in a technology advanced environment?
I think the skill that becomes more important is communication. Because at the moment you're putting reports and it's kind of done in that sort of way. But as you're getting more and more data, you have to parse that and figure and communicate that in a concise way when you're actually presenting something or explaining or defending something. I think that sort of communication element becomes more important than it is perhaps today. It becomes probably key, like in almost any other space. It's getting more and more important as AI becomes more prevalent.
Yeah, I would also say, like, to really understand the problem that sometimes is the reason why someone needs an appraisal. Like, we had cases where a client mandates an appraisal and everything is done, and then it turns out they needed a completely different type of appraisal because, like, this, let's say, this consultant aspect, like the communication was not there. And I think that's something that needs to be highlighted more, like to really understand what's the overall goal and how can we improve the service level there.
I think an obvious one is computer literacy. In a world of changing technologies, yeah, I mean, the ability for people to keep up with how things are changing and being able to maximize their usage is obviously an obvious one to say, but it is important because you get a lot of people now, even today, that just can't make the most use out of those sorts of technologies or don't really have the capacity to figure out how those technologies work. And so that is going to be obviously a key aspect. But I think that as kind of the generations come through is almost a given, given the amount of time people now spend using various different technological devices.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you to our panelists and to our audience for joining today's panel discussion on the future of commercial property valuation. We've covered a wide range of topics, from how technology is improving accuracy and efficiency in valuations to the ongoing challenges around data quality and accessibility. It's clear that technology is making a real impact, but there's still much more to explore and refine along the way. If you have any questions or thoughts, don't hesitate to reach out. But for today, thanks again for watching, and we hope that you found the insights helpful. So thanks to our panelists.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.